I often will tell the story that twice a week I sit down on one of my social media apps and I just spend what I hope will be 15 to 20 minutes. If I don't set an alarm, we know it's going to be 30 or 40.
Yeah.
And I just read the parenting questions and the responses.
Okay.
And I have to say, overall, people's responses are fantastic. I see it as a real resource. I think it's really helpful. But the problem is, if this person's child is sick at 2 a.m, not one person on that thread is going to come help them.
Yes, it's that community.
Yeah, it's exactly what you said. We feel like we are connecting. We feel like we're creating a community, but it's all passive.
Yeah.
And it's all like,
it's a parasocial relationship almost.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think, the only way to turn that around is to be honest with ourselves, to be honest with each other, that these are experiences, but they're not relationships. They're not relationships.
Yeah. I wanted to touch on something you mentioned about kind of like community organizations and how they need help. Do you find, because I love the idea of a third spaces. I don't know if you've heard about this. So like spaces that you don't have to pay for, like a library or a park or places that you can just go to be with people that isn't it's not exclusive to people who can afford it or whatever that is.
Right.
Do you feel that it's a lack of demand for the spaces, or do you feel that our society itself lacks the spaces? Sorry, I'll rephrase the question. Do you think that people, because of their phones, perhaps don't want to go to these kind of places? Or do you think that there aren't as many of these kind of places anymore because of how our society is structured?
Well, the second question I couldn't answer except for my own hometown, which is South Bend and Mishawaka, Indiana.
Okay.
And both cities have phenomenal park systems.
Okay.
Phenomenal. And I think that they are used fairly well. And like any kind of park, there's busy times and not. But I think you have to understand the science of cell phones and devices to really answer the first part of the question. And that is, why are people not going to public spaces?
Yeah.
So can I jump into the science for a bit?
Please hit us. We'd love to hear it.
Okay. When I think about cell phones, and I think this really doesn't look on at first like it's connected to loneliness, but I actually believe it's the biggest driver of loneliness. And not just loneliness with another person, but loneliness with the people you're living with. And more importantly, loneliness with yourself. And I like to tell 2 stories about that.
Okay.
For the first 6 years, I was a therapist in the inner city of Chicago. And I went in home, and all the families I worked with had triple diagnoses: poverty, sexual abuse, and a third thing, maybe addiction, whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
And I worked a lot with the family, a lot with the teenagers. The teenagers, they had very low resources. They were impoverished families.
Yeah.
Those teenagers today, those teenagers of 40 years ago had better communication skills than the middle class and affluent teenagers I work with today.
Wow.
And that is because texting doesn't develop communication skills.
No.
And so the first story is, we have to really understand that we're developing a different set of skills on the phone.
Yeah.
But we actually are wired from the beginning of time for relational skills.
That's right. It's natural.
Right. It leads to my second clinical example. Maybe 6 or 8 months ago, a former client of mine who I saw as a teen called me. She was in her early 30s. She said, "I'm really depressed and anxious. Could I come back and see you?" Sure. I'm going to send you these screening tests. Take them. And it was confusing to me because she wasn't anyone that I had seen for depression or anxiety 20 years before, 15 or whatever it was. They came back. She was moderate to high. She came in for her session. She gained about 15 to 20 pounds. She'd been a high school, college athlete, so that was a little surprising.
Yeah.
She sat down, updated me, married, happy, great job. But she was in a downturn of her job, and it was a commission-based job.
Okay.
So I said, "Oh, so do you think that's why you don't feel well?" And she said, "Well, I think so, because I'm only working like 15 or 20 hours a week." And I say, incorrectly, because therapists can be wrong a lot, "Oh, that must be a lot of financial stress." And she goes, oh, no. They taught us in the good times to always put a part of our salary away. That way, when the seasonal slowdown came,
Sales low. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, we had money. We could go out and have a great time.
Okay.
So then I said, okay, that didn't make sense. And I think for your listeners, it's really helpful to know when we don't feel good, we always create what we think is a solution, or we always create a hypothesis, and we should test it out. So even when she said it, I could see on her face that her hypothesis, I'm anxious and depressed because of my job, didn't make sense.
Okay.
So, because it's not my first rodeo, I said, how many hours a day are you on your cell phone? And she literally goes like this. The cell phone shame face.
Yeah, she knew.
She knew. And I said, well, and she goes, oh, probably like 4 or 5. I'm like, okay, check. So she gets in, she checks. And the last 2 weeks, she'd been on it anywhere from 5 to 12 hours.
A day.
Wow. So I said to her, I'm happy to keep seeing you, or you could run your own experiment. If you get your cell phone use down to 2 hours for the next 2 weeks, that's the only way I can assess if your anxiety and depression scores are accurate.
Okay.
She was like, you're kidding me. I said, no, too much use of the cell phone causes anxiety and depression. And when you're using it as much as you're using it, and you're in the house all day, you're not going out and about, then that's one thing.
Yeah.
She goes back in 2 weeks and she's like, I can't believe it. And in the last 9 years, I've had 30 people who have fit this profile. And I'm not taking, 30 new clients a month. I'm taking probably 15 new clients a year because it takes people
of
a
course.
lot.
Yeah.
But so I like to let people know. We talk a lot about a mental health crisis. Everyone who has anxiety and depression isn't caused by the cell phone, right? There's people who have anxiety and depression not caused by it.
Yeah.
But anybody who has it, if they overuse their cell phone, it will be worse.
Okay.
And so I want people to begin to think about mental health and lifestyle, which of course I'm not the first person to say that, but the phone really contributes. And there's very clear science that if you're up for it, I'll share it with you. That 100%. Explains why this client came back in 2 weeks and felt so much better.
Okay, what is that?
So what I like people to think about, you have to create an infrastructure for this little beast. Okay. This is a 17-year-old. It's the cell phone is 17 years old. That's a nice case, right?
It is.
And I have worked on this for 12 years, and this is this is what I've come up with that has worked for most of my clients. Think of it like an infrastructure. We all know what infrastructure is. It's a road that gets us to one place to another so we can do what we want to do.
Yes.
And they run smoothly. There's, an agreed upon way to use the roads and when to stop and when to go. And if you stop and think about infrastructure in the United States, it's pretty amazing.
It is. Yeah.
So we need, and it keeps us safe. It connects us. It keeps us safe. That's what I want people to do with their phones. Create an infrastructure where you can use this device so it's connecting, but you can also use it so it's safe. And the acronym I have is ACT, that we have to act ourselves because we're not going to have any government regulation to save us.
True. Yes.
And one of the things,
we have to take control.
Yeah. I say this all the time to the midlife parents I'm working with. I'm so sorry because I have not had a parent in the last 10 years that has not had significant distress and intense situations with their children about the cell phone.
Oh, I can imagine. And I mean, how young are you finding that kids are getting cell phones these days from your experience?
It's very dependent on the school they're in.
Oh, okay.
There are some schools, where kids are getting them in kindergarten and first grade.
No.
And there are some schools where kids get them in 5th grade, and there's some schools where kids get them in junior high. Wow. There doesn't seem to be an agreed upon. And I think it's also very dependent on what part of the country that you're in.
My son is 7 and he's in 1st grade and he does not have a phone. by any means, but we go to the gym, and the gym has a daycare. So you're getting kids from all over who come to the daycare. And there's 2 9-year-old boys he's friends with, and they both have cell phones. And I come in, and Dawson's on TikTok on some other kid's phone, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like we can't have you on TikTok, because goodness knows what you're going to see, you know?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And so the acronym I use is ACT, and the A is awareness. That I want to teach everyone the basic science of the cell phone, because people think it's a character issue. Oh my gosh, I've been on my cell phone for 6 hours. No, it's just pure science. It has nothing to do with character. It has nothing to do with willpower. That when they created this little device that we all love, and we probably love to hate it, the inventors in Silicon Valley had all the information to neuroscience. And they created a device that hooked up perfectly to the reward center in our brain. Mm-hmm. And the primary neurochemical that gives us the feeling of pleasure and reward is dopamine. Yes. So when we're on our phones and we're scrolling and we're getting likes and we're seeing kittens or shoes on sale or whatever is your thing, your brain is dumping dopamine, and it's very pleasurable. Yeah. And the obvious question is, what's wrong with that? Exactly. Well, the problem is that the brain has adapted slowly over time, and it isn't accustomed, and it doesn't know how to adjust to these rewards that are urgent and rapid and intense. Yes. So it's basically dumping the dopamine out very quickly, and the brain doesn't know how to replenish it. And
so that leads to a crash almost?
It leads to a crash. We're familiar with like sugar crashes, but this is a dopamine crash. Wow. And the best example is pull a 9-year-old who's been on a video game for 2 hours off. Yeah. And they will literally have a tantrum. Yeah. And it's really understandable if you know the science. And it's really fixable if you know the science. That this child isn't being a brat. This child's brain is not created to be able to buffer this type of intense, quick, shots of dopamine without being able to replenish them.
Absolutely. And it was something I didn't even plan on touching on, but I would like to say that the short form content, I imagine, is also something that's really affecting the attention spans of kids.
Oh, because it's unbelievable. Not just children, because
everybody.
I live in a town with 5 colleges and universities, and they're the college and university, and these are University of Notre Dame. It's a fantastic school, but the attention span of the students.
How do you listen to your 2-hour lecture when you're used to 90-second videos just hitting all the algorithm is hitting, obviously getting you all the things that you like. And I know, especially TikTok, I believe, has kind of I like to call it like a slot machine kind of way of doing things, where it will purposefully give you 3 or 4 videos that you're not interested in and then hit you with one that it knows you like. So you get that rush of like, oh, maybe next time, maybe next scroll, I'll get one that I like. So it really is playing with our minds a lot and affecting our attention span hugely.
Yes. And what the example you just gave really parallels drug use. That when people begin to use drugs, the euphoria and the pleasure,
they chase the high.
Is the high, and they go again and again because they're chasing that feeling state. And the creators of the phone have duplicated that in incredibly subtle and smart ways. It's one of the reasons that we absolutely need government regulation. Yeah. We have government regulations on planes, on cigarettes, on alcohol. Yeah. All of them affect our safety. All of them affect our brains. The difference about the phone, the difference about gaming, is that this is children. That children's brains are actually being changed.
Yeah, and they're developing brains as well.
They're developing brains. Yeah. Yes. So my A in my acronym is need to be aware that the science, there's no disagreement.
Yes.
Complete agreement. And the other thing that happens is what used to feel pleasurable now feels less pleasurable. Yes. The brain was evolved to have pleasure walking in the woods, seeing a sunset, getting a hug. And if you think about it, those things for many people that I've worked with, and certainly myself, don't feel as pleasurable, because what we're used to is these quick, intense dopamine hits that do feel pleasurable.
Yeah.
And they've actually set our brain into a place where the brain wants more of that. And when we get the less interesting type of,
reading a book, whatever it may be.
Right.
Yeah.
And so apply that to children. Everything in
Mm.
childhood takes a while to learn, and none of it is that exciting. To
Wow.
read, to learn math tables, and all of those things require slow and steady rewards. Yet from the time of 3 and 4, 5, children are really being able to use devices, and they're becoming accustomed to these intense rewards. And then I don't want to read. That's boring.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. What is the rest of the acronym?
Well, the C in ACT is to create phone-free time.
Yes. Okay. Okay.
And I think about the infrastructure, because your family's phone-free time compared to my family's phone-free time will look very different.
Mhm.
And that's the beauty of the metaphor of using the infrastructure, is that every family needs to really create a block of time where everyone is off their phone.
Yes.
So I was just talking about this with one of my clients yesterday. He's a single dad, or he's divorced, and they have shared custody. And so he's really trying to figure out how to get the iPads under control. His kids are 9, 7, and 5. And the 5-year-old's asking for an iPad for Christmas. And as we really talked about it, part of C in creating phone-free time is being just aware of your ability when it comes to discipline. And I don't mean discipline like a child, but yourself.
Yes.
Self-discipline. That, are you someone, if you set out to do something, you're going to do it? Or are you someone that's really hard to keep yourself disciplined? He's the latter.
Okay.
So I don't think one is better than the other. I think you just create different infrastructures so you're successful. And what he really decided is he's going to get on Amazon. He's going to buy a lockbox for the iPads.
Okay.
Because they are drug-like. So
Yeah.
he puts them away. His kids find them. He tells them 45 minutes. He gets absorbed in something else, an hour and 20 minutes. And so he said, I'm just going to buy a lockbox. And then we talked about, should he get the 5-year-old? The recommendations are that we don't want 5 and 6-year-olds to have their own iPads. I do understand, like right now, people are pushing the red button because their kids have them.
Yeah.
If you have them, there's a solution.
Okay.
But his reason for wanting to get her one is because she wants to watch it with the other siblings.
Yeah.
And it causes tension. And I'm like, no, this is alone together.
Yeah.
What if you said to the siblings, there's going to be sibling sharing time, just like people used to do with the TV.
Exactly.
The siblings had to pick one show. They had to figure it out, and they sat in the room and they watched it together.
They talk about it a little bit. It's a richer experience.
It's a richer experience. And they're learning all this sharing kind of skill sets that are really important. And the guy's saving, I don't know what an iPad costs, $1,000. I mean, so he's saving money.
Yeah.
And think about it, just like, who gives a 5-year-old? I mean, I know we all do.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, do we really want a 5-year-old to have $1,000 piece of equipment? And
that's so interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that it's like the siblings are fighting. The other two have an iPad and she wants an iPad. And it's like the solution you would think is, okay, we'll get her an iPad. But when you really draw it back, it's that, why are we all so desperate to all have an individual iPad? Like if the thing is to watch TV, we can watch TV or whatever it may be. But no, I find the same thing with my son. I have a 7-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter. And we'll have that kind of time where it's like, okay, screen time is over. And there's always this, we turn screens off kind of at dinner time. And then right now we're reading the Harry Potter book. So that's kind of the activity. But once we're cooking dinner, we say, okay, dinner's ready, screens off. And we get this resistance and we have this hump to get over. And it's funny. It's the same thing when I ask him to go out for a walk. I get this huge resistance of like, no, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. The second it starts, and it's as if his levels come down or something. He says, oh, I actually really like going on walks. Or, oh my God, I forgot we were at this chapter. And it's like, there's just an initial defense against it. And then it doesn't take long. It just takes pushing through. And then that drops away. And they're adaptable. They're very happy to adapt to a
Yes.
screen-free activity. But that resistance can, in a weak moment, you can say, "Oh God, take it, just take it." I can definitely empathize with that dad 100%. Hey everyone, Chelsea here. I would love to take a moment to introduce you to our app, Yoga Plus. You will gain access to an incredible collection of videos led by top instructors in yoga, fitness, nutrition, and so much more. Download our Yoga Plus app today and get a free 14-day trial.